Hello and welcome. I am Steve Clements, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks so much for joining us for our great program today, The Future of Cities, a discussion with mayors from all over the country. We're holding this forum on the sidelines of the U.S. Conference of Mayors winter meeting, which is happening right now just across the street from our studio here in Washington, D.C. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the American Public Transportation Association and Tableau, for their support of today's discussions. U.S. cities are really diverse, they're dynamic, they're constantly evolving, but nearly 2 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived and sped up this evolution big time. Since then, it's pressure tested our infrastructure, our economy, and our collective strength. But with added challenges come increased opportunities to reshape our existing structures and build more sustainable cityscapes and enhance economic stability and resilience and improve the lives of residents, especially those who are most vulnerable. With the passage of the infrastructure bill, what comes next for America's cities? How can city leaders work with communities to strengthen connections across cultures and across generations? And finally, as we envision the city of tomorrow, what pitfalls should we sidestep? What blind spots do we have? What new heights should we expect to climb? We're going to be speaking to some of the most influential and interesting mayors from across the country today. But first, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillCities. We're broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. And it's with any live stream. If you experience any trouble, don't throw your computer out the window. Just refresh the page. They tell me that will fix it. I'm not going to laugh here, but I hope it works for you. We kick things off today with two Conference of Mayors leaders. Hillary Schieve of Reno, Nevada, one of my favorite cities, is the second vice president of the Conference of Mayors. And Brian Barnett, a friend, I've talked with him before. He's been a great friend of the Hill. Brian was a mayor of Rochester Hills, Michigan. He's the former president. I should actually say he's the immediate past president of the conference. Innovation and inclusion are two top priorities for both mayors. Mayor Schieve and Mayor Barnett, great to be with you. Thanks so much for joining us. Let me just ask you, I think, a gauzy question, which is, in Washington, D.C., you look around the country, and our narrative here is a divided nation, not just two sides, maybe seven sides, a toxic culture, communities not engaging, people living in bubbles. Mayors have this responsibility to kind of sew things together and get people to work in more pragmatic ways. So, Mayor Schieve, when you kind of, looking at the future of sewing your community together and meeting needs, what's at the top of your priority list?
Well, you're right. Mayors are very, very nonpartisan, and we live and work right in our communities, right, every single day. I think now more than ever, this pandemic has taught us resiliency, but also really looking at cities in different ways and how we can bring our communities together. I think unity now more than ever is what my community is really craving. And I think there are so many ways that we get this opportunity in looking at futures of our city, and not just today, but what is the future? And so this infrastructure bill is going to be critical on how we build our cities into the future. And I think, honestly, unity is a huge, huge proponent of that, because we felt so isolated for the last couple of years, certainly due to this pandemic. So mayors are really looking at innovative ways with this infrastructure bill and how we can unify our communities. I think mayors were already sort of the cheerleaders of that initiative, but now more than ever, we really know what we need to see in our cities to really unify.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. Reno, Nevada is one of the places, just to be honest, I ended up there more often than not in that city on New Year's Eve than any other city. But if I were not just there on New Year's Eve and we were kind of looking at transportation, you got this cool thing I've been reading about the Neon Line District. Put some bells and whistles on what that transportation infrastructure is going to look like down the road. What opportunities do you see? What problems are you solving for your citizens?
Well, now more than ever, transportation is changing. A lot of people, think immediately cars and things of that nature. I think obviously in this pandemic, we're looking at public health, certainly broadband. That is really important. One of the things about Reno, I think people think Reno has been predominantly gaming. We have really diversified our economy. That was really important to me. I'll tell you a quick little story. You might like this, but growing up here, people would say, "Where are you from?" And I would say Lake Tahoe. I was sort of embarrassed to be from Reno, and I really wanted to build a city that was inclusive and other people and people like me that grew up and were born and raised here that wanted to be a part of. So we've really diversified our economy. We have companies like Apple, Amazon, Apple, Switch, all building and investing here. But I've also invested a lot in arts and culture and micromobility. Now more than ever, we'll see, technology change and evolve. And so, Reno is a really dynamic city and we're changing incredibly fast, but arts and culture and all the things that make cities great, and especially with infrastructure, our parks are incredibly important, our open spaces, places where people also want to be outside and feel engaged. And so we need to think sort of outside of this box. And one of the things is, cycling and transit, and we're getting ready to do this big scooter initiative and a cycle track. You see that very popular in European cities. So things that really can bring a community together, but also innovative. And I think that's what cities are really looking at. What is the future for this next generation?
Right, Mayor Barnett, you and I have chatted before, and I guess it was with you, and we were like at a lunch or something with a big gaggle of mayors. And I used to think that mayors, became popular if they filled potholes and got the trash collected on time. But I realized in kind of the show and tell that you had when you were president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, there were so many other dimensions about how you weigh in on inclusion, how we're, beginning to rate some cities, like we rate buildings on, sustainability and best practices and whatnot. And I know that you've left your job as president of this, and Francis Suarez of Miami is coming in, so you'll have to tell me what he's getting wrong already. But you got to tell me how in this world, becoming a mayor is no longer just about potholes and about trash collection. Tell us what is on the screen of Rochester Hills, which I should tell the audience is one of the safest, judged to be one of the safest places in America. So that must have been one of your priorities.
Well, it was, and it is. If you don't, really have safety in a community, you don't have a whole lot else you can fall back on. It's a privilege to be with you and Mayor Sheevey. Of course, I was just getting ready to think about buying a second home in Reno after that last answer. She's a great leader for the organization. So there's something really interesting, and it's always very fun to be in Washington, D.C., because I think our organization stands in such stark contrast to what we see and hear every day in this town in particular. We just had a press conference an hour or so ago where Republicans and Democrats and independents stood shoulder to shoulder next to each other, patting each other on the back, smiling, encouraging each other, not always agreeing 100% on everything, but understanding that there's probably 85% of the stuff that we do agree on, and really focusing on that. You asked what it's like to be a mayor. There's one thing that's really unique about being a mayor that I think is interesting, and that is that in study after study, we have earned the most trust from those we serve. People trust local levels of government more so than state and federal levels. Now, why and this whole history of that, I don't pretend to understand or know all of that, but I do know that in my community, people trust me. So what that does to me is tells me I've got a certain level of accountability that I better deliver on, whether it be transparent ways I run the city and what we're actually working on in terms of creating a city for everyone. And so with that level of trust, with that level of accountability, comes a tremendous responsibility for mayors to deliver results. And that's, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, stands in stark contrast to the sort of pontificating that you often see in polarized politics in cities like Washington, D.C. today. I love being a mayor because I love working and learning from other mayors.
Well, let me ask you to just double down on that for a minute. You've really, when we spoke before, but I also know that you were on a panel with this conference this year on disability inclusion. And when we've talked before, you're kind of for inclusion of all kinds. And this is the really interesting question, because we talk a lot about inclusion. We talk a lot about divides, racial, income, opportunity. And I guess the really interesting thing is I am wondering, what is the secret to getting people who feel unwilling, unless you've done what you're doing, to basically be inclusive? How do you get gravity to work in a way that brings people together so that as a city manager, planner, you're creating and building in inclusion in a way that parts of your city can't reject?
Sure.
Is that fair?
It's a great question. There's not a super simple answer, except that mayors have to lead by example, right? And coming from where I come from in the Motor City, one of the things that we talk about the future of cities, and as it relates to your question about disability, the future of transportation is huge. Electrification is huge. autonomous vehicles are tremendously important. Think about, we often talk about the last mile in public transportation. Think about the last decade. Most people have their keys taken away from them before they're really probably done with driving. Think about if you're able to offer mobility to the disabled community, the opportunities that you'd give them both in work and life. And so, you think about those and think, okay, well, I don't maybe know anybody disabled. I don't have that personal experience. But man, I do understand how transportation works, how the freedoms it creates in my life. And I can see a path and how what I'm doing impacts and affects others. And, that's just one small example of ways that, I think that we all are sort of interconnected. It does start by mayors leading by example. And if you don't recognize now that making sure your community is an open and accepting place and that you're constantly working to include everyone, you're going to be passed. There's just no way around that. It is, my community is more diverse in every census, considerably more diverse in every census. And if I'm not paying attention to that, shame on me.
All right, that's great, very powerful. I want to ask Mayor Schieve a question from the audience, but I want to tell our audience that she was made in 2017 chair of the Conference of Mayors Committee for Tourism, Arts, Parks, Entertainment, and Sports. So you know that TV show Parks and Recreation, that's kind of the hot plum committee as far as I'm concerned. It's probably got big rankings. But Jim Whitehead, who is the CEO of the International Society for Sports Psychiatry, says each city will have its own strategies and challenges. But what are the coordinated efforts that all cities should be part of? So it's a really interesting question. You're at an assembly of mayors, you're working with them in this, and I do think that sometimes people forget how powerful culture, arts, recreation, parks can be as defining edges and also drivers of growth and experience. But what he's asking is some of that can be boutique and some of that can be coordinated. And I'm interested in how within the conference you approach that with some of your colleagues.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, and Mayor Barnett knows I'm a big proponent of arts and culture. And one of the things that we have here right in my backyard is Burning Man. I don't know if you've ever been to Burning Man, but it is an incredible experience. And not
Grover
to mention when we
Norquist
talk,
keeps wanting to take me. I'm probably going to get in trouble for that, but Grover's trying to drag me out there.
Right. I know. I've got pictures of Mayor Barnett. So when he runs again, he might have
I've been reelected since, so you can get reelected and go to Burning Man.
Mayor Barnett, were you clothed?
I'm losing you.
But Burning Man is absolutely phenomenal. And I have to tell you, when we talk about infrastructure, it's really amazing about that pop-up city. It's the largest pop-up city in the world during that week. And so we learn when mayors go out there a lot about infrastructure as well, and sort of the practices that they use out there, which are, really fascinating, like MOOP, for instance. And that's, you're not supposed to leave any material objects behind. So there's like this big sustainability component to Burning Man as well. But obviously the arts and culture out there are something like probably no one has ever seen before. And it was interesting to take mayors out there, and mayors that were reluctant to go. And actually, once we got out there, they got very comfortable and realized, it was a very free environment, but also looking at art, how they can infuse it in their own cities, and seeing this massive attraction of 70,000 people that are coming together, for this big event. There's so many different layers to it, but it really sort of, for me, epitomizes, the definition of arts and culture in someone's city and how to leverage that. It's economically, for me, it's the busiest time at my airport. All my small businesses thrive when Burning Man is in town. There's a massive economic impact when it comes to arts and culture, and that definitely can't be overlooked. And so I'm very fortunate to have it right in my backyard and be able to take mayors out there, for part of the day and part of the night so that they can experience what that's like. And out there, we talk about, this sort of nonpartisan, and that's what I love about the arts. It is nonpartisan, and it makes us all come together. And, we try to infuse arts in every single development project that we have. I think arts are the way that you package a city. And the first time you step off a plane into a new city, you look at it and you say, wow, I can see this great arts art sculpture? What else is there, hiding in the city that really kind of brings to life arts and culture? So it's very, very important. And I think, mayors really, really embrace cultures of their community. And it gets us, you're talking about how do you create those, how do you remove those barriers? And I think it's really, truly through arts and culture.
Well, and thank you. I mean, and Mayor Barnett, I'd love you to build on the same question, because the question is interesting, because I mean, like every city, will have its own assets. But what I love about the conference of, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and particularly when you were there, is that they're great shows and tells of innovation. And sometimes you go in and learn something that, somebody was doing in one place. And there are a lot of really key questions, about our society right now. And as I mentioned, LEED certification communities are developing that are not just buildings, but they're driven by parks, quality of life, intergenerational inclusion, racial inclusion, all of these other dimensions. And I know in Rochester Hills, you have been working real hard on kind of, opening new green spaces and trails, bringing this in. And I'm just wondering how hot the competition is to turn your towns and cities into cool places, because in a COVID world where we're all online and not necessarily forced to be in office, creating that quality of life has become important, not just in the Bay Area and San Francisco, but everywhere, right? I mean, so how are you competing in this new environment in a post-COVID? We're not post-COVID yet, folks, but we will be post-COVID. But I have a feeling that we're all going to be less attached to a single geographic spot. So what do you think, Mayor Barnett?
Well, you're spot on. It's almost as if you were listening to one of our earlier meetings this morning, when the pandemic has pulled back the covers on a lot of things. There's been some interesting benefits that we've realized. Communities have come together, and nonprofits have stepped up, and we've learned a lot about ourselves. But there's been some challenges that I think are going to be systemic. And one of those is the fact, as you just mentioned, people are realizing with the rise of telework, you don't have to necessarily work close or live close to where you work. You can choose to live where you want to live. And that makes placemaking for a mayor and a community really important. The parks, the amenities that you have, the library, the soft services that you provide become really important, because no longer does it matter if you're only going into the office maybe once a month or at all. And so it's creating challenges, because in states like Ohio, where they are funded in large measure by, and I love making fun of Ohio as a guy from Michigan, but in states where they are funded largely by income tax paid by where you work, not where you live, and less and less people being in these downtown urban areas, that's creating a real challenge. In suburban communities like mine, it's something we have to be very mindful of. We are going to be competing against a much larger geographic area, because people no longer have to necessarily live close to where they work. In a community like mine, I think that sets us up nicely, because we have invested, even through the pandemic, incredibly aggressively in parks and recreation. That's always been an important tenet of who we've been. So communities that recognize that, I think, will be well positioned. And there'll be some real challenges for urban communities as we sort of figure out the future of retail and the future of work.
Wow, it's fascinating. It's a wonderful discussion, again, Mayor Barnett, with you. And Mayor Sheevy, it's great to meet you. I want to thank Hillary Sheevy, Mayor of Reno, Nevada, and I think she's probably honorary mayor of Burning Man, if I may say so. And Brian Barnett, Mayor of Rochester Hills, Michigan, immediate past president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Really appreciate both of you taking time with us today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Our next guest is Mayor Michael Hancock of Denver, Colorado. Denver's a huge place, much bigger. We're going to get into that in a moment. But he chairs the Communication and Transportation Committee for the Conference of Mayors, and he's going to be sharing his thoughts on innovation in infrastructure during the conference. Mayor Hancock, it's great to see you again. It's great to see you live and in person. Look, one of the big issues that's come up politically, maybe metaphysically, is 5G and airplanes, right? Yeah. I'm in and out of the Denver airport all the time. Also, you got 5G coming online, and all of a sudden we have this issue come out of nowhere. I just want to ask you, for our readers, can you explain it to me, and can you give instructions to Secretary Buttigieg on what he ought to be doing?
Well, actually, I stand in support of Secretary Buttigieg and the airlines, quite frankly. I don't think there's anything that should trump, quite frankly, the safety of the people who are landing in the air, our pilots and the crews and the passengers. So if there is some concern, we haven't crossed every T, dotted every I, my recommendation is don't go live until we have settled that
question.
I
get that. I guess, because you deal with communications as well as transportation. The whole thing in my mind is like, So we've been talking about 5G and how important it is, and
Extremely
being
important.
competitive,
Yeah.
and what South Korea can do or Europe can do that we can't do. And so all this stuff coming on 5G, and you would have thought somebody had crossed those T's and dotted those I's before.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you
are
would
the
think-
mayors screaming because you all have big airports?
Well, I'm awfully concerned about it. Now, you got to understand, I'm very much in the aviation. I sat on President Obama's Aviation Management Committee, FAA Management Committee. And so this is an area that is particularly focus and interest of mine. When that pilot begins to descend and to land, he or she turns it over to the tower, and he depends on them a great deal. And that information must not be interrupted by any means. And so you would think they would cross every T and dot every I, but sometimes we're so excited, we're moving forward, and someone may have missed that, or they at least said, hey, listen, we got in Europe, as I've heard some of the 5G carriers saying, we got in Europe, there's been no interruption. Let's just make sure we're clear before we go live.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, look, we've been talking to mayors from small cities, big city mega regions like Denver, and I know that in the greater Denver metropolitan region, there are lots of mayors in that area, but you're the biggie. You're the feudal lord in the middle of all that. But I'm interested. In one point, Denver, Colorado was the frontier city of the United States, and I think as we sit on the verge of thinking about infrastructure dollars coming in, looking at correcting a lot of problems in our cities, that we had divides and in opportunity in different cities. How do you create the 22nd century frontier city that's less about geography and more about the assets and uniting people? I know it's a big metaphysical question, but I know you kind of think that way.
It is, and here's reality. We may not be creating that big mega city. We may be creating the big mega region, because what we do now globally, because of our advances in technology and travel and interest of people, the reality is that we don't compete as cities anymore. We compete as regions. People are interested in the metro region of Denver. And that's why we have one of the great models in the metro Denver area of cooperation and collaboration between mayors as part of the Metro Mayors Caucus. 43 mayors coming together,
43.
making decisions, for the region, deciding to do regional.
I thought it was 6 or 7. but you
Yeah,
got
no,
43.
43, working together, making decisions with regards to transportation planning, transportation implementation, taxation, tourism promotion. Those are things that are going to, quite frankly, propel a region forward. And that's why we think in Denver metro area that we do this together as regions and not as cities.
So when you look at the future of, say, public transportation, which has been one of the themes we've been getting at today, now I'm familiar with the highway system that goes through and how it's been expanding and what both the opportunities and limits are that are. But what about private vehicle transportation?
Maybe transit.
When you deal with the transit side, what's the future of that look like in your region?
Well, let's take it under the guise of the current infrastructure plan that's coming to all of our cities. And as I'm thinking about, for example, Colfax Avenue, you say you're familiar with it, the longest road in America is Colfax Avenue. It goes across multiple cities across the state of Colorado. And with those infrastructure dollars and thinking about the future, I wouldn't plan just for the Colfax Avenue segment that's in Denver, Colorado. I would think about the cities that surround me as well, and how we can continue whatever improvements we need to make, maybe capitalize on the benefits of working together, going to the market together, making sure we have continuous construction teams working together to improve it, to do multimodalism, whether it's bike lanes and transit, bus rapid transit, whatever we're going to do on that road. We must think and know that people are looking at multimodal ways in which to travel and traverse our cities. And so together we can build that road and improve it for the 21st century.
Let me ask you another question. It may be unfair because I don't think it's completely under your terrain, but I interviewed the mayor of Boulder a few years ago, and Boulder at that time was registered somewhere as the happiest place in America, happiest city in America. And they thought, well, it's because people have purpose and they get to ride bikes and all that. Who knows what it is? But the other side of Boulder was, I remember, a big mudslide. Another side of it were the fires we just had, the Marshall Fire.
County,
Our
sure.
condolences for the huge impact that had, both in people's lives, but also their homes and whatnot. And so you're a place where I would say it's bigger than climate change, but just violent weather and circumstances of just, reality about the environment right now is coming down. How do you think about that? How does that become part of the transportation and communications picture of your city?
It doesn't become a part, it is a part of it. The reality is that if we want to impact climate change, we must deal with single occupied vehicles. Today, 73% of Denverites and the surrounding communities that come into Denver travel in single occupied vehicles. That's unsustainable. It also is a recipe for disaster, climate change wise, for our children and our children's children. So the reality is we've got to fix that. We cannot allow that to happen. We've got to drop that to at least 55% and keep going and doing everything we can to convince folks to let go of their steering wheels, consider transit, and we've got to be willing to invest and build the transit necessary to move people affordably, conveniently around the metro region. And we also got to be willing to do things like bike lanes. People got to recognize you're going to start sharing the road with pedestrians and people on bikes and scooters, and so you got to provide for folks opportunities and options and alternatives to just jumping in a vehicle. And that's the only way we're going to do it. And so I think it's critically important. If we're going to impact climate change, we must drop that SOV or that single occupied vehicle. No.
What is the Denver story with infrastructure investments and decision in the past, or bank financing, or others that Anthony Fox, I'm sure you know Anthony Fox, another alum of Mayor's. And look, I'm going to get in trouble because I can't remember right now if Anthony's working for Uber or Lyft. It's kind of like Pepsi and Coke. Sorry, Anthony. Sorry about the well, no, he's working for one really. But he really taught me a lot about how the legacy of infrastructure in this nation was racist and loaded and biased, and we have to dismantle that and rewire and recreate, and we're going to get that opportunity again. I really admire him. So I guess the question is, when you kind of look at equity, which has been something we bandy around a lot here in Washington, but when you have to kind of get rubber meets the road, doing things in a real way, how do you look at equity and reinventing and rewiring the transportation and communications picture for your people?
Anthony and I come from the same swath. He was what I call my dinner mate at these conferences. He and I would go grab dinner and glass of wine and talk about these issues.
And for our audience, he was former mayor of Charlotte, and he was a former Secretary of Transportation.
Secretary of Transportation, and a dear friend even to this day. And he talked about ladders of opportunity. And as we build our mobility strategies in our cities, we must think about ladders of opportunity. What I say, Steve, is you want to know where poverty exists. If you want to know where poverty exists, show me where the least amount of mobility options exist, and I'll show you poverty, because you're locking people into an area system that does not allow them to move, to expand, or create opportunities for themselves, whether it's jobs, schools, grocery stores, healthy activities and environments, parks, and what have you. The reality is that when we get a chance to bring affordable, convenient, practical transportation options, particularly transit, into neighborhoods, particularly underserved, parentally overlooked neighborhoods, and we have affordable housing there as well, now we've got a recipe of ladders of opportunity that begin to move people up that ladder and to begin to obliterate poverty, and at least those elements of poverty. So Anthony's absolutely correct. It was discriminatory. It did segregate people. But now we get a chance to pull them out through these infrastructure, transportation planning opportunities, and equity has to be our guiding star.
What do you think the Biden team needs to hear from major cities today to do better with them?
With regards to transportation or anything?
Anything.
Well, I think they're doing.
I say this humbly, that it's a hard job being president. We've just come through, and we kind of look at everything we've had, the pandemic, divisions in this town, the murder of George Floyd, others, Ahmaud Arbery. You have real stress in American society, January 6th. It's a tough load.
Sure.
But on the other hand, when you kind of look at the question of toxicity, and I think the thing that I'm always intrigued with when I talk to mayors or governors is that they have a responsibility to kind of sew their communities together. I think we spend a lot of time, perhaps, unfortunately, seeing things, the benefit of driving things apart. So if mayors were to run the country, how would you do it differently? What advice would you have for the Biden team in terms of pulling the country together?
Well, it's not just Biden, it's the Congress.
Well,
and we've seen that, right? So the thing that we say about mayors, we cannot and we don't try to get away from our constituency. The beauty of Washington is that you bring everyone together to make good laws, hopefully good laws and good decisions for the people. The bad thing about Washington, or Congress, is that you bring everybody away from their constituency. Mayors go to the grocery stores, we see our constituencies. We go to the movie theater, we see our constituencies. We go to the park, our constituency is there. And so we're constantly in that conversation, and we're constantly in the will of the issues that people care most about. I often say, The issues that are my priorities are the same issues that are on your mind, Steve. When you walk on your front porch and on the early Saturday morning in the dew of that morning in Denver, Colorado, what are you thinking about? My roads are in good repair. My neighborhood is safe. My parks are welcoming and accessible to me. I can walk to them. My children are healthy and they're in this neighborhood healthy. The schools down the street are performing. Those are the things that we must work on. So my advice to Biden and members of Congress, get back to the people. Stop playing the partisan politics. Get back to the people, and there you will find the issues that Americans care about and hopefully improve your governance of this nation.
We have a question from the audience for you, but before I do that, I'm going to go a little bit longer because I want to ask you, because you've thrown yourself at homelessness, which is something we haven't talked about in today's forum perhaps enough. But you take it very seriously and you're doing things. So I look at the mayor's conference that you're attending as sort of a great opportunity for show and tell. So if you're at show and tell on stage and talking about a way that you're whacking at homelessness in Denver that others might replicate, what are the features of that?
Well, we must recognize it's not just about money. And the reality is that there are a lot of mitigating circumstances that are complicating the challenge around homelessness. It's already a very complex issue. It's the most complex issue I've ever dealt with. I've got 5,000 plus homeless people experiencing homelessness in my city. For every person on my street or who are homeless, experiencing homelessness in my city, I must tailor my approach to them. And so it takes an infrastructure, it takes resources, but more importantly, it takes a willingness to lean in and say, we are going to do everything we can to help every person who's experiencing homelessness in our city. No excuses, lean in and recognize it might be substance abuse. It might be mental health. It might be just familial disassociation, but lean in and try to build an infrastructure that helps to serve the people and meet them where they are.
It's a huge problem in the country.
Huge problem, but you also got to have some guardrails, right? You know, for in Denver, for example, we don't allow for encampments in the city of Denver. We rather have you indoors. We know if we get you indoors, we know we're connecting you with services, you're more likely to be stabilized. We do a housing first approach, but we also recognize we got to have some good mental health and substance misuse strategies as well.
Yeah, just noting, in the tweets from the city, you just placed 576 individuals in housing. Yeah, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, look, it may not even be the tip of the iceberg. I don't know, but I read a lot of stories going the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we've got a question for you from Kevin. Kevin.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Zedek with the American Flood Coalition. My question to you all is, where do you rank resilience to extreme weather events in your list of investment decisions when planning your capital budgets and local projects? And how do you view the role of the federal government, states, individual cities, and regional resilience partnerships in preparing for natural hazards?
Appreciate that, Kevin. Great question. First and foremost, we revamped our emergency response strategies in Denver because right just before the pandemic, actually, in the event of natural disasters, biological disaster like we're experiencing now, how do we respond as a city? We take our entire leadership team in the city of Denver through simulations and making sure that we're responding. It's like being in a movie theater, a movie set. We are actually acting out a simulation so we can build a resiliency, but we must also make the investments in that capital infrastructure to fortify our resiliency. The partnerships with the state, federal government, critical. It is very important. Unfortunately, the federal and state are by nature, and many times municipalities as well, are reactive to the situation. But the best we can do in a local level is try to prepare, try to simulate situations and how we might respond so we can be prepared. And thankfully we were as a result of COVID and those simulations. But we also need our federal and state partners so that we can respond appropriately.
Finally, Michael, you and I have been talking a lot over the years. You've been mayor there for a long time. I think you're in your third term, if I have it right. Any interest in applying for a job in town here?
No, no. Washington has its own flavor, and one thing you will learn after being a mayor, you're used to getting things done. You're used to saying, let's fix that pothole and expecting that pothole to get fixed. I don't have time for partisan politics or bureaucracy. The people expect results.
Well, Michael Hancock, mayor of Denver, Colorado, thank you as always for joining us here. Thank you very much for joining us, and good luck at the Conference of Mayors, which I find to be one of the most fascinating meetings that happens in this town. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to introduce a message from our sponsor, the American Public Transportation Association. Please welcome Paul Skoutelis, the president and CEO of the American Public Transportation Association.
On behalf of the more than 1,500 transit agencies, businesses, and transit-related organizations across North America that comprise the American Public Transportation Association, we are honored to sponsor the Future of Cities Summit. The Hill has assembled an impressive group of thinkers. Our association is helping to make this event possible because the story of America's cities and towns is the story of transportation. Mobility built our communities. It has propelled economic growth and prosperity, and it's the catalyst for progress and personal freedom. Now, public transportation will have the resources, the opportunity, and the obligation to help transform America's cities and towns for a new, bold, and exciting future. Thanks to the $1.2 trillion Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and a new 5-year authorization for surface transportation programs, our industry is ready and eager to lead change. This once-in-a-lifetime level of federal investment will enable us to repair, replace, and modernize aging and stressed transportation facilities, to expand services where they are most needed, and to make public transportation more resilient, reliable, and convenient. But building a better future for our urban communities and for the transit systems that serve them is about much more than money. The pandemic taught us many vital lessons over the past 2 years. COVID-19 revealed long overdue needs, and it accelerated new trends. As a result, many cities and towns are looking to public transportation to take an aggressive leadership role in protecting the health, safety, and security of passengers and the public, including cybersecurity, fighting the effects of climate change while promoting sustainability, advancing racial and social equity by expanding access to economic, educational, and healthcare opportunities, and helping drive the recovery, growth, and a better quality of life in our cities and communities. The pandemic taught us to value our time, our friends and families, our personal preferences, and our values. This means that public transportation requires a new level of customer focus. By offering more travel options through microtransit and on-demand services, and by being more flexible and adaptable. By connecting all service providers, making scheduling and paying for a trip as easy as using a smartphone. And by increasing convenience and access so that we become the preferred travel option of more and more people. The key to meeting and even exceeding these broad social, environmental, and economic goals starts with public transportation. Whether it's equity, growth, jobs, affordable housing, the environment, and safety, public transportation is the essential element in all these priorities. Collaboration among local leaders is absolutely key. Whether it's accommodating transit passengers, bicyclists, or pedestrians, or balancing the needs of daily commuters and occasional riders, or managing access to information or access to the curb, or creating bus-only lanes in walkable streets, or reducing urban parking, or making transit more appealing and desirable than using a private car. All these issues are in the hands of our mayors, our city councils, urban and community planners, economic developers, and yes, public transportation leaders. Our goals are the same, the efficient movement of people and the efficient utilization of time. It's about improving the local economy and the human experience. It's about the quality of accessible mobility and the quality of life. APTA is thrilled to contribute to this discussion. We look forward to playing an essential role in the new future for America's cities and towns and to making this a seminal, groundbreaking year.
Kate Gallego is the mayor of Phoenix, Arizona, and the chair of the Jobs, Education, and the Workforce Committee for the Conference of Mayors. The Conference of Mayors is one of the greatest conferences of really interesting innovators in urban arenas that I know, and I'm really thrilled that she is here and others will be here for this forum today. She's been an advocate of transportation and micromobility in her city. She's also made sustainability a priority for her administration. Mayor Gallego, it's great to see you in person. Look, I'm fascinated by mayors because you folks are getting things done while we sit paralyzed frequently in Washington. But I want our audience to understand what a mayor's world is. And as you look at your dashboard of what matters in the city and in your time there, what needles you're trying to move, tell us what some of the top 3 or 4 big things are.
Absolutely. So we are very much still fighting COVID, making sure that the city does our part in getting test kits and vaccinations out. We're also trying to take advantage of the fact that we're going through a sea change in our economy, and how can we make sure Phoenix is at the leading edge of clean technology and advanced technology, particularly semiconductors, bioscience, and transportation investments are happening right now.
We need a lot of semiconductors right now. I mean, semiconductors are in short supply. They say that's one of the big drivers of inflation. Is Phoenix going to solve that for us?
We are planning to do our part. My biggest economic development announcement as mayor occurred at the height of COVID, and it was TSMC, who makes the semiconductors that go in your iPhone, announcing they were going to invest $12 billion in Phoenix. So that was a huge relief for us. We want to be a global city, and the fact that we could still have that type of global investment in our community was exciting. We have our community colleges, all hands on deck, getting the workforce ready, as well as our university system. We have a small city right now building semiconductor fabrication in Phoenix, everything from their own cement plant to some of the largest cranes anywhere in the world.
Amazing. Well, one of the other areas that I know is on your dashboard, you're thinking about it, as we've talked about it before, is sustainability, resilience. I mean, you have like a heat mitigation director. I think you have one of the first in the country. If I'm getting that right, you can probably counsel me on that. But as you kind of look at dealing with climate, dealing with how you build an environmentally responsible and sustainable transportation infrastructure, what are some of the big bets you're making?
So we are the first city in the nation to have a permanent part of government that's in charge of heat. What we said is we have to have all hands on deck, and we need a way to coordinate an effort to adapt to heat. We are trying to do cutting edge solutions where we have the most innovative buildings that are really thinking about heat, but also traditional tools like planting trees. We're changing the pavement in Phoenix. We have a cool pavement program that doesn't absorb as much heat. And we just, again, want to be on the leading edge. If you're a company that has a solution that needs to be deployed, we want you to think of Phoenix, and we have a partner to help you do that.
I mean, another piece of this, which you and I have talked about, is when you look at communities and you're trying to sort of address, I mean, we have real serious problems in this country, and I'm sure Phoenix has an edge of this, of inequality, different opportunity for different communities. And if you get right at it, transportation options are often a very key piece of it. And I've just been looking at your transportation plan, which is pretty mammoth of this. Can you run through some of the things you're looking at in public transportation and how you're going to try and help people get to the jobs and where they're at?
We are trying to build out both cutting edge and some of the traditional investments. We have a light rail system, and we got the first major grant of the Biden administration to expand that. It's helping us revitalize some of the shopping malls that were not doing quite as well during COVID. And as soon as that infrastructure investment happened, the private sector stepped up and said, we're going to make huge investments right along the route. We're also trying to look at electric vehicles and how we can make sure that they serve our entire population. We have a robust citywide effort, and we're actually sometimes called the Electric Valley because of the concentration of companies in the greater Phoenix area. But is there a rideshare model where electric vehicles can become more accessible to our residents? And how do we make sure they're ready for the jobs?
Right.
We have partnered also with our community college on electric vehicle.
So what you said is really important. So part of the Biden infrastructure plan money has already reached the city of Phoenix, and you've already deployed that with expanded transportation options. I mean, I had not heard yet that the money had flowed, so it's very interesting to me. I mean, do you see it, that huge bill, $1 trillion bill, came in basic on infrastructure, that's already helping you?
So the grant we received to expand our light rail, we had applied before the bill passed, but we received formula funding for our airport, for our transit system, and other investments. For some of the most cutting edge programs, we still have to apply.
And I also know that you're a hero of micromobility. Tell us about micromobility.
Well, we are trying to make sure that you can get throughout our city, and it's really micromobility is a force multiplier for us. So if you can get to our light rail station, and then how do we get you all the way to your destination? So we're really trying to work with industry to make sure we're organized about how to deploy it. And also we want to see multiple different modes. There are some people for whom bicycling
bikes.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah, bikes and scooters. And I mean, I don't know all the little micromobility options. I see them kind of I live in Washington, D.C., and I see, scooters and different bikes, electric bikes, but there may be other things I don't know that are out there. But, when I'm talking to a number of these companies, Bird or, Uber and Lyft have taken over some of them, one of the things you hear a lot about are regulatory control, caps on levels. Do you find yourself in a friendly position with these transportation options, in a friendly relationship with these providers, or is it tense?
We have a good partnership, so we work with them to make sure where you can pick up the bicycle or the scooter, and that there are certain zones. We have a great group in our downtown that really helps coordinate that as well, and we're trying to map out the need and the demand. They have a new focus on equity and making sure that not just the college students have access to these as well, and we want to be leading edge on that. We're also trying to be leading edge on autonomous vehicles. If you step outside of Phoenix City Hall right now, you will see those companies right now doing extensive mapping. If you're going to come visit us for the Super Bowl in 2023, maybe it'll be your first chance to arrive in an autonomous vehicle.
That would be kind of cool. Let me ask you just a quick question about workforce, because I know that's what you're here talking the U.S. Conference of Mayors about. And we talk a lot about it, but there's an enormous gap right now in open jobs and those people applying for them. And I've always been fascinated by where our strengths and weaknesses are, taking our population and getting them into jobs. Are we providing the best training options for them? Are we helping to subsidize or support that training for them? And I'd just like to know, within the kind of greater Phoenix area, as you look at upskilling your citizens in a way they can afford and then get connected to job opportunities, what are the tangible things in that equation that matter most to you?
We have, from the semiconductor industry to bioscience, these great leading edge jobs, and we're working with our educational institutions to make sure people are ready for them. We've had so many companies coming into Phoenix, and we want to make sure the people who already live in Phoenix can get those jobs. So we've partnered with the community college, not just to provide classes, but also if you have a transportation barrier, how can we get you there, or can we go online? If daycare is a challenge, we have vouchers to support that as well, and that's been very successful. We're also learning that if we just go out into our communities, that can make it easier to break down barriers. It was a big week for Phoenix. Yesterday, we won the Bloomberg Philanthropies Mayor's Challenge. We were one of 15 cities recognized for our mobile career unit.
Well, congratulations on that.
That's been a great recognition, and one that I'd recommend to other cities.
And what does it do? The mobile career unit does what?
So we have a van so we started out with our COVID program doing mobile testing and then mobile vaccinations, and what we found is there's a lot of people, if it's at your church parking lot or your kid's school, you're much more likely to take advantage of those services. So we repurposed one of those vehicles and started out with a mobile career unit. You can interview for a job from the van, and we connect you to employers. I interviewed for a hotel job. They didn't hire me from the van, but it was great technology, COVID safe, and easy for people who
No, it's
have.
so interesting. I think it's one of the really big interesting gaps is where local governments and city governments can really make a difference in connecting people. We're taking questions from the audience, and we have a question for you from Noah Banayan. Noah?
Hi, my name is Noah Banayan. I'm the Director of Federal Affairs for People for Bikes, the national trade association representing the U.S. bicycle industry. And my question is, how are mayors planning to use infrastructure bill funding to build out connected, protected, active transportation networks to support an increase of biking, walking, and micromobility use? Thank you.
What a great question. Mayor?
Thank you, and it's very exciting for me. Long before I ran for office, I was the chair of our advisory committee on environmental issues and helped create our first bicycle citizen effort at the city. We have developed a roadmap for our entire city, which is more than 500 square miles, and so this federal funds will help us really expedite installing that infrastructure. My predecessor in the mayor's office is now in Congress, Greg Stanton, and he worked very closely with us from his position on the Transportation Committee to make sure that safety and mobility were part of this program. It's really unprecedented to see the Department of Transportation investing in safer corridors. We have so many exciting opportunities in the city. We actually have a very large canal system that delivers water. We have more miles than Venice does, and we're hoping to partner with the federal government to create bicycle corridors along that. There's something about water in a desert that really inspires people, and people just like either exercising or getting to school or work along those.
It's definitely lifted my mood hearing how well things are going in Phoenix, because when you look at the last couple of years, it's been bleak for a lot of families, a lot of folks out there. Let me just ask you, and I know Representative Greg Stanton, he's a great guy, and I'm just interested in both of you. When you sort of talk to your friends in the Biden administration, what do you think they most need to hear that they're not hearing? Or what do you think just finally, that if you had one more element of something to help not only your city but other cities in ways that they might not be thinking about, what do you think one of those items might be?
We are really trying to send a message from the U.S. Conference of Mayors that cities are innovation labs and that you ought to give direct funding to cities and let us see what we can do. We're hoping the energy efficiency and conservation block grants that were in the last, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act will really be a model, because what Phoenix needs to fight climate change is different than what Washington, D.C. needs, but we're going to have that great American ingenuity and we'll come up with solutions, some of which will spread throughout the country, so that direct partnership with cities will really get the dollars to the people.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We'll make sure at least we'll do our part in helping them hear some of it. Mayor Kate Gallego of Phoenix and chair of the Jobs, Education, and Workforce Committee at the Conference of Mayors, thanks so much for joining us here and telling us about what you're doing at Phoenix.
Good to be back.
And now a message from our sponsor, Tableau.
Tableau is on a mission to help people see and understand their data. And nowhere is this mission more important than in the public sector, where program and service demands are rising, resources are constrained, and constituent expectations are higher than ever. Tableau's visual analytics platform is transforming how agencies use data to solve problems and deliver on their mission. In the cloud, hybrid cloud, or on-premise. In the office, or in the field, Tableau is ready to meet you where you are. The flexibility of our industry-leading platform allows you to control how program, administrative, and agency data is accessed and shared, so you can harness the power of visual analytics, AI, machine learning, and other technology innovations to improve productivity, empower employees, operate securely, efficiently, and effectively, build trust with constituents, accelerate speed to insight, and take decisive action. In other words, you can go from this to this. The need for data-driven government has never been greater. Learn how federal, state, and local agencies are positioning their organizations for the future at tableau.com/government.
Joining me now in studio is David Holt. He's mayor of Oklahoma City. As mayor, his One OKC message seeks to promote a common purpose in a divided country. In addition, he's focused on making Oklahoma City an engine of economic growth in the region and one that is welcoming to entrepreneurs. Mayor Holt, it's great to see you live in person in the studio
isn't
there.
this wonderful?
You know, like I've been talking to you online now for a couple of years. Look, I think it's really intriguing that this annual meeting of the U.S. Mayors Conference in Washington is kind of a reminder and a wake-up call about what you could do in cities that you can't do at the federal government, that there's a lot of innovation and things going on. And what I've been asking every mayor I've been talking to is, as they look at the challenge right now in what looks to us from here at the top perch, a kind of toxic country, not talking to each other, people living in bubbles, a lot of people talking past each other. I'm just interested in the role you think mayors can play in healing this country, healing their own towns and cities, but healing this country.
Yeah, well, wow, great question, profound and timely question, but I have an answer. I mean, mayors get things done because we have to. That's the first reason. I mean, it seems as if it's a luxury at the federal and state level to play politics as entertainment, you know, to kind of pat yourselves on the back for an awesome tweet or a great press conference and not actually get anything done. That somehow, people on the ground don't depend as much on the federal and state levels. But at the city level, listen, if you're a human being in a city, you're going to use a city service 25 times a day, you know? I mean, we can't afford to not take this seriously, and we can't afford to not work together to have outputs that our residents expect. So that's the first reason that mayors are generally successful, because we have no other choice. The city wouldn't function, our lives wouldn't move forward. The second reason is many of us, not all, but many of us are elected in nonpartisan elections, and we wouldn't even have enough time today, but to me, the evils of American politics all stem from the reality that most people in public service positions are elected through closed partisan primaries where they have to, appeal to a small subset of the electorate. They do not get to face the whole electorate, and in turn, the whole electorate does not get to choose from all of the candidates. They're often deprived of some of the best candidates that never get to come to the general election. But in a mayor's race, in most cities, we may be known to be Republicans or Democrats. It's not that. It's that we get to face the whole electorate, and they get to choose from all of the candidates. And so somebody like me, you mentioned One OKC in your introduction to me. That's a mantra I have lived as mayor, because in running for and in serving, I get to build a coalition of regular people from across the ideological spectrum, Republicans and Democrats, and I get to count on their votes as well. You know, I know that when I run for re-election, I'll have the opportunity to get Democratic votes. I don't just have to go through a closed partisan primary. And I find that 70 to 80% of people, despite all this rhetoric about a divided country, actually just want to work together and get things done. And this extremism really just comes from the 15% at both ends that tends to have an outsized voice in closed primaries, but are largely rendered irrelevant in a nonpartisan election. And that's why you get mayors who are really statespeople. And why so often people think, gosh, I wish my president, I wish my vice president, I wish my Speaker of the House, I wish my Senate leader was a mayor. At least that's how mayors think anyways.
Yeah.
But the reason they often admire mayors is for all of that we get things done, and we have to, and we get to get people together on the same page. I would have no other option for success in Oklahoma City if I didn't do that, because we're a very purple city. We have to work together. But this is a purple country all in all, and I hope that somehow mayors can lead by example and continue to provide a path forward for our country towards that type of healing that you just referenced.
Mayor Holt, let me ask you another kind of complicated question. I'm not even sure I'm going to get this right, folks, but you know my family's from Oklahoma, about 3 hours north of Oklahoma City in Bartlesville, which is near Tulsa. And I am aware of some of the divides and divisions in Oklahoma, more in the Tulsa area than Oklahoma City. But I know that in our past we did have redlining of districts. We did have divides. We had transportation decisions that benefited some parts of towns, and and really created big costs and hurdles for other parts of town. And I look at the infrastructure bill, and I've asked this of a lot of mayors and governors around the country, is this not an opportunity to push reset and maybe use these dollars to come in to kind of tie these communities back together when in fact those dollars were used to divide them in the past? Is that part of your thinking when you see money come into Oklahoma City on the infrastructure bill? Is that a priority, or have you already kind of moved forward on that in ways that our audience should know?
Well, I'm very familiar with what you're talking about, and we certainly have an interstate in Oklahoma City that cut right through at the time, the historic heart of the African American community. Unfortunately, sometimes so much time has passed that those communities don't exist anymore. I mean, they're not there anymore to be connected. They left that area because it was destroyed by the highway. So, and largely I find that's the case in Oklahoma City. I'm well aware that in the infrastructure bill there is a focus on that, and I think that's great. It's not a lot of money, really. It's about I believe it's $1 billion. I don't know if you know road construction costs in America, but
no, you're the first one. Everybody says, yeah, we're in D.C., we're getting a lot of money. You're the first to actually say, I've been wanting to ask it. Is it a lot? You need more.
I mean, $1 billion for a country to reconnect all of its neighborhoods that were broken by interstates is that might do one city. But by doing it at all, you are at least starting that conversation. Because how many people have been talking about the division of communities by interstates? Very, very little, unless you're like a student of interstate history, or you read books about New York City. I mean, it's not something that's been on the radar. So I'm glad that the infrastructure bill puts it on the radar. There's a need for a lot more resources beyond that to make it happen. In Oklahoma City, I'm definitely open to that conversation. But the truth is today, especially in a city as sprawled as Oklahoma City, transit is probably a better answer for connectivity than covering over highways.
How is the transit picture in Oklahoma City, the public transit? How much does it cost? How much do you have to build? Do you have the resources you need?
So we're 620 square miles. We've given ourselves an extraordinary challenge. We are the same size. You could put Chicago, Boston, Manhattan, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Miami inside the city limits of Oklahoma City at the same time.
Wow. Will you say that again? Say that again.
Oh, don't make me rattle them all off again. No,
right.
Chicago, Boston, Miami, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Manhattan. And I could usually pick about
folks,
6
I want to just, that is a tweetable moment if you can get all that. Okay, go ahead. That's profound.
But we only have 680,000 taxpayers. I mean, we're the 22nd largest city. I don't mean to say only. We're very proud of that. But at the same time, I just rattled off 6 cities that have a combined population, or more importantly, a combined taxpayer base of millions of people. So public transit has been a struggle for us for that reason. We're built around the automobile. We're very spread out. There are some bonuses to living life that way, but public transit is not one of them. So it's something that we as a community over the last 10 or 15 years have focused back on and tried to provide a higher level of service. And there's definitely a lot of big conversations happening in Oklahoma City about public transit. And we're optimistic at the prospect of getting a bit of a jolt through the infrastructure bill.
Well, on the other side of infrastructure, the modern highway is broadband. How are you on broadband connectivity in the greater Oklahoma region?
Yeah, we have historically been completely dependent on the private sector for that, you know, and so you have, I won't give them free advertising, but lots of great partners in our city that work in the private sector in that area. I want our people in Oklahoma City, though, to chase everything there is in this infrastructure bill, and most of it's going to be kind of grant-based and application-based. And so I'm well aware of the broadband component, and if there's a need that we can try to fill in Oklahoma City, I absolutely want to chase it. But to this point, in our community at least, that hasn't been a focus of the public sector. But I'm well aware that we have that opportunity with the infrastructure bill, maybe to fill some gaps.
Look, one of the things you and I have discussed before, and it's one of my little obsessions, are these small firms, micro ventures, you can call them ventures or micro businesses, that really have not, maybe until recently, begun to kind of even register on the dashboard of things like the Small Business Administration or the money and resources that were doled out during the pandemic. And a company called GoDaddy basically commissioned a study working with the University of Iowa, Arizona State, I think UCLA Anderson School, looking at the development. They're an internet registrar, right? So they can kind of, look at when they're looking at the hotlines of people plugging in, of this growth of these micro businesses across America, and then looking at how those communities during a recession or during times end up being the ones that bounce back faster or resilient. Or if you look like the way people are trying to develop side hustles, and the diversity among them is astounding. And I know that you've been looking at this and also looking at specifically in Oklahoma City. So I'd love to kind of get a take from you about how you're looking at these micro ventures and how you're communicating about them to some of your mayoral colleagues.
Yeah, well, first of all, for people who followed political discourse as long as you and I have, you know that a few decades ago, small businesses really entered the lexicon in a big way, and everybody from mayor to president learned how to talk about small businesses, and we still do. But I think what GoDaddy's identifying here, and other obviously people in this discourse, is okay, maybe there's need for one more stratification. Like small businesses is a pretty broad spectrum, everything below Exxon is a small business, right? So, So what about these businesses with 10 or fewer employees? I mean, they're small businesses, but boy, their challenges are very different than a business with 60 employees, right? So maybe we need to kind of talk about micro businesses in a unique way. And so essentially, most small businesses started as micro businesses. I assume very few people hire 20 people on the first day. It was one guy, one family, and they grow from there. So most of your economy is going to be micro businesses, and all of your future economy is going to start as a micro business. The big companies that are great in Oklahoma City, we always like to point out, started as small businesses, but really we need to point out they started as micro businesses. They started with 1 or 2 employees. So that's a big driver of your economy, and if you want to have a city where those types of businesses are accommodated and grow and stay, you need to kind of think about how are we working with them? Are we providing the regulatory environment? Are we providing the cultural and quality of life environment? Are we providing an inclusive environment? Are we providing access to capital? How many cities bemoan the loss of tomorrow's Google because the 2-employee firm had to move to Silicon Valley to get access to capital, And so we want to be on top of all those things. And I think it's a fresh look in the last few years, but I definitely see that our economic development team in Oklahoma City is more focused on that than ever before. We've got a lot of different programs, and we're also being very intentional about equity and making sure that we're especially cognizant of minority-owned micro businesses and so on.
And do you find the uptake, because I know you have a significant Black population, you have a significant Native American population, are you finding them embracing the resources you're putting forward?
Well, sometimes, but sometimes you really have to go out. I mean, you can't, what we have learned in so many issues of equity is you cannot just put it on the website, and expect people to know that that's where to look. I mean, you really have to be intentional about bringing these opportunities to people. They have great ideas, but they may not have had the exposure to bureaucracy and incentives that other people have had, and there's nothing wrong with that. We've got to go out though and be proactive. And that's not just a business thing. I mean, it's about government too. It's about representation. I mean, you just can't kind of sit back and say, well, the doors were unlocked, they could have come in. I mean, you have to go take people by the hand and really show them the opportunities that exist.
Well, look, I want to tell our audience, because I wrote an article about this, I just have it memorized. You can actually learn more about it. I'm not promoting this for them, but I think it's really interesting. And I just love the fact that there's a major American mayor sitting here with me talking about, the development on kind of the business scene that a lot of people in D.C. are just not even aware of. They don't even know how to begin thinking about the environment.
I suspect this word microbusiness is going to be integral to the political lexicon in 5 years.
That's great. Well, I think because of what you're doing. So it's called the Venture Forward Study. I think it's at ventureforward.com. Don't hold me to that, but you can look it up there. But David Holt, Mayor of Oklahoma City, really appreciate your time. I could spend hours talking to you, I know, and I hope you'll come back many more times. But thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the time.
My next guest is John Giles, the mayor of Mesa, Arizona, and chair of the Immigration Task Force for the Conference of Mayors. Some of his priorities include economic growth for the city of Mesa, as well as education and workforce development. Mayor Giles, it's great to be with you. And I just want to tell the audience, he's also host of the podcast, It's Always Cool in Mesa, of which I'm going to be the next subscriber and regularly listen in. But just tell us about some of your cool recent guests, Mayor.
Well, thanks, Steve. Alice Cooper is our latest episode. Alice was raised in Arizona and has been a great community member his whole life, and he's got a wonderful teen center that has been in Phoenix, and then just opened another beautiful location in downtown Mesa. He's a great. One of the ironies I said to Alice Cooper is one of your big hits is No More Mr. Nice Guy. And he's really genuinely one of the nicest people you'll meet and gives back in a huge way to our community. So that's one episode. It's kind of the behind the scenes thing. There's a great episode, believe it or not, about our cemetery and the fact that we've got 23 RAF cadets that are buried there that died during World War II in Mesa, Arizona while they were training to be pilots. And just a lot of little quirky, fun stories about Mesa, Arizona.
Well, I love quirky, fun stories. I also love odd bedfellow stories. And when I saw Alice Cooper in your Twitter feed, and I just said, there's got to be something here. And I just love the fact. I mean, it's just something that popped out as sort of unusual and defining. I think as we talk to a lot of mayors who are participating in Washington this week in the Conference of Mayors, it's an interesting opportunity for show and tell, so that mayors that are such innovation leaders and work with private sector, public sector, NGOs. They're all trying to establish priorities, and I've been intrigued with Mesa for a long time, and I'm always interested. What are the levers you're most trying to push? One that's popped up is the Mesa College Promise, and as one of your priorities, I'd love you to share with our audience what the Mesa College Promise is.
Well, thank you, and this is another great example of stealing good ideas from other mayors. There are parts of the country where college promise programs are not unusual. California, for example, does a great job of supporting their community college systems, and most of the cities there take advantage of legislation in California that allows them to provide this college promise, which is a promise that says if you go to high school in our community, and you fill out the FAFSA form, we're going to make sure that you get at least 2 years of community college in our city. So. Mesa is the first city in Arizona to do this, but I think you're going to see a lot more communities in Arizona and countrywide steal this great idea that's been proven in other cities. That the increment to get out of the registrar's office at a community college after you take advantage of Pell Grants and other things is not huge. So this is an affordable thing that cities can do to promote workforce and higher education attainment in our cities.
Let me ask you a question, and I'll tell the folks, I do not know the realities in Mesa and Phoenix around this, but you have a lot of inbound investment from companies like Google and Apple and Amazon. And in the old days, you go, wow, that's really great. That sounds cool and neat. But I remember, 2 decades ago, that was often a sign that the state and the localities had basically forfeited their tax code as a way to invite these companies in. And I just don't know what the situation is today. So as these companies are coming to invest, and as you're kind of looking at development, is the equilibrium in the right place between how these companies come in and become contributors to the civic space and issues around you and the tax base? Or is that still a problem in terms of development, even with brand names like these?
No, you're describing Mesa because we have in recent years become the home of Apple, Google, Facebook, and others coming to Mesa, and they are the investments that they're making in their facilities in our communities are in each case multi-billion-dollar investments. And I'm pleased to tell you that there are very little, that there's some minor state incentives involved, but there is no rebates that are being given from local government for these developments. The thing that attracts these types of world-class employers are two things. It's the investment that we made in infrastructure. You have to have the water and the electricity and the transportation infrastructure. There's other types of infrastructure they're interested in as far as workforce development and education. But that's what we've done to attract these businesses, not sweetheart deals, to kick back any tax revenues.
One of the other areas that you're working on with the Conference of Mayors, I understand you're the chair of the Immigration Task Force. And that's a third rail issue here in Washington, D.C., depending on where you're at in terms of how you get this. We're also facing a time in the United States where there's an enormous gap in available open jobs, particularly in the service sector, vis-a-vis those looking with very low official unemployment rate. So I don't know, Mayor, where you're tilting one way or another on immigration, but what are the equities that matter to mayors, and particularly border mayors with our southern border?
I think hopefully you're seeing this evolve into a bipartisan issue. I am a Republican, but I come from the 35th largest city in the United States, but we're in the top 20 when it comes to DACA recipients. And as you mentioned, I'm a border state mayor, and we are one of those places that has more jobs than we have workers. So these are all that set of circumstances combines to make this a very, very real issue in Mesa, Arizona, and not just in Arizona, but nationwide. I think you're seeing support for Dreamers and immigration reform really in the high 70s, across all the political spectrums. So immigration reform and responding to the workforce demands that these great employers that are coming to my community, those are really top drawer issues, and we've got our fingers crossed that we can be a good influence on our congressional delegation and those around the country to take advantage of this administration that is so supportive of comprehensive immigration reform.
It'll be interesting to see if some of that begins to break free, because right now you've got a lot of people talking past each other. But, before we jump to a question from our audience, I'd also like to give you an opportunity. You are a Republican, you're a mayor. I know your work, and, you don't tend to operate from a partisan North Star, as best I can tell. But in that, I guess the question I like to ask mayors is, if you were to try to talk to the Biden administration about how to make sure that the rails that interact with cities were better or improved, what would be, because we have a lot of bills coming. We have the bill, well, I don't know if we have Build Back Better, but we'll have the infrastructure bill. You've got parts of the American Recovery Act that are still out there and being funded. And so as this comes in, what are the messages that you would like the Biden administration to hear on how to improve the interaction between federal and state and city management?
Well, we're all familiar with the phrase that, all politics are local. And really, for anything meaningful to happen in our country, it's going to happen at the local level. It's going to happen at the city level. So I would just be anxious to remind the Biden administration and the federal government in general that cities are not important partners. They're essential partners in making anything happen in a meaningful way. So I'm really proud of the way that our city, for example, has responded to the pandemic, and the way that we've been such good stewards of the CARES Act money and the American Rescue Plan Act money that's come directly funded to cities. I mean, at the local level, my city government has distributed over $30 million in rental assistance and utility assistance payments. And if that were left to the state or federal government, it just it would not have happened. So there's a lot of these issues, if not most of these issues, really need to be resolved in partnership with cities and with mayors and with local governments. And I think, the Biden administration knows that, and I've been encouraged with the outreach that they've made to this point.
We've got a question for you from, I think it's James Jollicoeur. Jim?
Hi, my name is Jim Jollicoeur. I'm a retired superintendent of schools in Massachusetts, and also have my own consulting firm, Partners in Implementation. My question is, how can the dynamics of city strategic and community development be more fully integrated into the city education infrastructure, such as student community service, project-based learning, and job opportunities? Thank you.
That's a sophisticated and interesting question. It's really like, how do we get the algorithm right, connecting, opportunity and education. So, Mayor?
Well, thank you. I appreciate, and we ought to have more superintendents involved in policymaking for sure. My city charter doesn't say anything about me being responsible for education in my community, but very early on as a mayor, I was meeting with our school superintendent, and he looked me in the eye in a very somber way, and in response to my question, what can I do to help you? And he said, Mr. Mayor, poverty is doing very well in Mesa, Arizona. And it really was a defining moment for me to realize that if we were going to be successful in my community in improving higher education attainment rates and improving the opportunity for kids to experience some sort of pre-K, before coming to school, and in making our K-12 districts successful, that the mayor had to own this issue. Education has got to be something that I think about and that I'm working on every day. We talked earlier about the workforce issues that we're experiencing nationwide and certainly in my community. When I met with these major employers, the only thing they want to talk about is workforce and what is our city doing to support the education system and getting folks to their doorstep that can take these great jobs that they're bringing to my community. So again, I think I appreciate the question on education. It's got to be at the top of all of our agendas. It is ubiquitous in all of the challenges that we're facing.
Mayor, just before we close, I want to ask you a question, because you have just much more of a tactile feeling for the parts of these conversations that we're not seeing. You could follow and trap in these conversations of seeing everything as rah-rah, going well, investments coming in. But you just talked about poverty, which I was very, kind of hit me. I'm interested in what you think we're getting right or wrong. Maybe education is a piece of that, but do we have blind spots when we look at the divides, the social, the racial divides, the communities that have been left behind, by progress, so to speak? And do you have insights into how we should be doing this? I think that's got to be part of the conversation, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it responsibly. And I don't think it's just Mesa, it's all over the United States. But what are your thoughts about that uncomfortable conversation that there are parts of the people that are not yet fitting in the equation that need to be part of that equation?
Well, I quickly realized that I have two jobs as the city of Mesa, as the mayor rather. But one is to brag about my community, and I could, if you wanted me to, I could paint a very rosy picture of Mesa, Arizona, and tell you how affluent we are, because we are. But Mesa, like I think most other cities in this country, is a tale of two cities. There is a large, we're a great combination in my community of people who have the means and have a sense of calling to serve their fellow man, coupled with people who need a lot of help. And there's absolutely is a critical role for local government to play in not only providing direct services, which again, I'm very proud of what we do. We are very involved in food insecurity and housing and, helping to meet the basic needs of folks who need help in my community. But also the most powerful tool that a mayor has is convening and being, the matchmaker between, again, the needs and the assets that my community has. So the good mayors know that, and the good mayors, I think, spend more time using their soft powers and convening and preaching and inspiring people, because that's what has to happen.
Well, John Giles, Mayor of Mesa, Arizona, really, really appreciate you joining us. I also want to tell our audience that Mayor Giles is chair of the Immigration Task Force for the U.S. Conference of Mayors Board of Trustees, and he's a member of the Mayor's Challenge to End Veterans Homelessness. That Mayor's Conference is meeting this week here in Washington, D.C. Mayor Giles, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thank you.
My final guest today is Mayor Quinton Lucas of Kansas City, Missouri, also known as Mayor Q, kind of like James Bond. He's led a zero-fare public transit initiative and adopted the city's first ever tenant Bill of Rights. Welcome, Mayor Quinton. Great to see you again. We've had fun talking in the past. And look, I interviewed, I don't know if I should mention his name. Well, I'll just mention, Gavin Newsom when he was mayor of San Francisco. And he said, look, my job is to deal with regulations on where, dogs crap, potholes and trash pickup. And he says that's what it takes to, kind of focus on being good. How has being a mayor changed in terms of you guys? What's on, your screen as the priorities beyond those, which I took as a very real way to look at it. But I'm just sort of interested, a modern next generation mayor has to worry about what?
It has changed a lot, particularly in the last 2 years with the pandemic. So you are not just the pothole guy or the public safety employee union fight guy. You are now the one who is interpreting health rules. For a lot of us as mayors, we're instituting the mask rules ourselves, vaccine mandates in the workforce. So that has become tougher. On the public safety side, you're the one who's thinking about real ways we think of modern policing, where it was the White House that might have run that conversation back in the 1990s. You have mayors that are coming up with innovative ideas as to how we make our communities safer. So you have taken on, it's always been a jack of all trades somewhat, but the amount of policy work you're doing, particularly if you're a mayor of a blue city in a red state, as a number of us are, you're dealing with just a ton of issues that are being put at the footstep of the cities.
Look, you and I have talked before, and as you know, I like to hang out with mayors, and you're having a big conference here with the Conference of U.S. Mayors. And it occurs to me that a lot of the big political issues that we talk about, even international ones like climate change, or how do you upskill your workforce, or how do we solve the inequality divides in America, or deal with broadband connectivity, 5G, building things on it, that while we remain paralyzed in Washington on so many of these issues, frankly, mayors are expected to produce, meet budgets, get things done. I'd just like our audience to hear about some of those tensions as you look. You're in D.C. this week. Yeah. Does it tick you off that you're here and we're not getting much done? Or is D.C. friend or foe in what you're trying to accomplish?
It's day to day, it seems like sometimes. Yeah, the thing about cities is we are the implementation laboratory. So here in Washington, there's lots of talk about infrastructure bill, Build Back Better, voting rights. We're the ones that are on the ground dealing with how do you make sure you're creating new rules for your election board every time the state's changing laws? How does the federal government relate to that? When it's talking about infrastructure, what can we spend it on is the question. When do we get it? How do we deploy it? Does it have to be big projects, small projects? Who's overseeing it? Who do we have to work with? I mean, those are the sorts of things that we are faced with right now. And the other thing that has been a bit frustrating, and I'm very happy to have, for example, the American Rescue Plan passed, but it has been intriguing when every time there's an idea of, well, public safety is an issue, so now you can spend this money on policing, or you can spend this money on climate issues. Well, the money doesn't necessarily grow bigger every time a new area for its expenditure has been rolled out. So we continue to ask for that better collaboration to the extent we can, direct funding sources coming to the cities rather than our state capitals, which I've often said are laboratories of bad ideas, and trying to find some way that the cities can actually get real stuff done, because that's what people expect when they see us out on the streets.
Before I show our audience this nifty looking kind of futuristic Kansas City streetcar that you've been piloting and talking about, and providing free transit for a lot of your citizens, I'd love to get into that in a second. I just want to ask you another question, a political question. You talked about voting rights, Bill, and I think one of the big contentions is that one party, the Democratic Party, thinks that if they don't take action to preserve at a federal level voting rights, that the other party will have free range to basically shut those down in rights within their state context. I'm just interested in somebody, you're very apolitical from my perspective, sure. And as you think about it, and as you know your constituents, do you think those rules matter that much, or will people find ways to vote within their state infrastructure? How do you feel about the federal overlay on voting rights?
Look, I think that if we're being as realistic as we can possibly be, between just the two of us talking, no one else, there are concerns with getting people out to vote. And those concerns aren't necessarily about the impediments that keep people from voting. It's often getting citizen interest in elections, making sure we don't have too many elections, making sure the issues are clear and represented. If we don't start to address that, we will continue to have, as many of us as mayors know, 15%, 10% turnout in municipal elections. Federal elections, it's exciting if you get to 50. So there is still just quite a bit of work to do if you're talking about how you get your base out to really making sure we do that. That's not me minimizing some of the very real challenges that I think we've seen put on by some states, but there also just needs to be a real discussion of how do we actually encourage more people to vote? How do we make it something that is more of a core part of civic engagement than it is these days?
I love that answer. It sounds so real. Let's show our audience the Kansas City streetcar, which there it is. There it is. It's zipping around. I don't know if this is an animated thing. Oh, there it is right now. Well, look, I'd like to know, this is a big priority of yours. You've got folks bringing their bikes on, doing these kinds of things. We're talking a little bit about best and promising practices in urban spaces in America and what's going on. What stood out, right, is that you're providing all of this as public transit fare free.
Yes.
And you're trying to expand that. So tell us about the streetcar as the start, but how do you, can you talk to folks in Washington, D.C. about how you're doing it, but how do you set up public transit, which I hear is just so expensive, and actually put it on the table for your citizens?
Yeah, because you become realistic about it. We are mayors here in Washington right now talking about implementation. Every public transit system, when you open up the books, does not receive enough money in fares to pay for almost anything substantial with the network. You can't pay for your workforce, you can't pay for your infrastructure needs, and so we finally said, well, how much are we getting from fares each year? In Kansas City, it was roughly $9 million. And so I said, well, wait a minute, right? And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to provide public transportation. So if it's only 9, can we find that through cost savings somewhere else in our area transportation authority? And can we give that money in essence back to our riders, many of whom find themselves in low income positions, many of whom rely on public transit each and every day? And so for us, it was actually just saying, you know what, find where you can fill that budget gap. And I think that every mayor in every American city can do that level of work so that we actually see public transportation as a public good for free, much like we see every road in the city, most of our interstate highways, everything else. When we build a new beltway system in any American city and expand onto them more and more, as we do in American cities, we don't ask, for example, how much should each person have to pay? We just do it.
Right.
I think we need to see public transportation fundamentally that way. And our zero fare model, both with buses and streetcars, has been a wonderful success in Kansas City.
Let me just ask you, we're going to go to a question after this. I want to ask you a question about why you're here in Washington, the mayor of the Conference of Mayors, and your role. You're here, as I understand it, to talk about gun violence, crime, and justice initiatives. And one of the things that caught my eye, Mayor, and some of the stuff you've done is, you've tried to kind of dull the edge of incarceration for stupid things like parking tickets and jaywalking. So thank you very much, because I'm a frequent problem in that front. But it also reminded me of Sandra Bland when she was pulled over for like a taillight thing, ended up in jail in that tragic situation. And the loss of her life. That there's a lot of people who don't understand the mental health dimensions, the stress that's out there. And I just want to know, as we see crime rise in cities across America, what are the initiatives you think we need to be thinking about seriously, both on providing more public safety, but also not doing it in a way that makes our problem much worse?
Yeah, I think it is about how do we dedicate enforcement time to things that need real enforcement activity, right? Illegal trafficking of firearms is a significant challenge and one that needs more police investigators, detectives, etc. Parking offenses don't really. Instead, we have moved those to something more akin to nuisance offenses, just like your neighbor playing terribly loud music. You're not throwing them in jail, you may want to, but instead we use a largely different system for how we address those types of issues. And so I think that has been a key part of our balance. So we can focus on gun trafficking, domestic violence as a core issue that's a challenge, and certainly solving homicides and non-fatal shootings. And one other thing to note in that, nothing I said was controversial. right? This is not necessarily a conversation that has to be about fundamentally what's the role of American
You were
police.
controversially non-controversial.
That's exactly right. You solve the issues that are necessary. You have enforcement going to where it's needed, and I think we have seen very little pushback in Kansas City.
Look, Mayor, as I told you, I was sort of raised in Japan, went to high school in Japan, didn't follow this. I hear you guys are pretty good at football, Kansas City Chiefs. So let me just ask you this, not knowing the game as well as you do, but I'm always into a really good suite if they're available. What would be your advice to the Kansas City Chiefs in keeping their winning streak going?
Well, you know, we've made it to the last 2 Super Bowls, so it's very exciting for Kansas City. My advice would be to score a little bit earlier. Last week it took us too long. Let's put some points on the board earlier, defeat Buffalo, then Tennessee, get back to another Super Bowl.
Oh, we'll make sure that that reaches them. We've got a question from the audience from you, from also another Q, Quentin Wilson. Quentin?
Good afternoon. I'm Quentin Wilson, a fellow at George Washington University. I'd like to ask the panel, above and beyond traditional bus and rail service, what new approaches are cities and regions taking to address challenges to access to services, things like education, healthy food, health services, and employment?
I love this question, Quentin, because it is the wraparounds, it's the ecosystem. So as you think about a healthy community and the healthy parts of it, I'd love to hear your response, but that's kind of a really great way to frame it.
Absolutely, and that's a great question, something we think about a lot. One of the things that we've done, you know, you have corner stores or bodegas in New York in so many places, but you don't have an abundance of healthy food at them. So we've worked with a company that's putting healthy food kiosks in all of them, making sure that you have fresh fruits and vegetables, making sure that you have those types of items that, you know, back when I was a little kid and we lived down the street from a liquor store, my mom would send me there to get food for us. And there would be some chips and pop and whatever else. So making sure that you actually have good options there in every neighborhood on every block has been key. One other thing that we're doing in our park system, it's not just about parks, but it's making sure that we can be more active, creating more walkable spaces, particularly in the Midwest and in the West, where we're getting a chance sometimes to build newer cities or newer areas. How do you ensure that it is not just car dependent? In a way, making up for the mistakes of the 1950s has been a key way for us to ensure that anybody walking through our city, traversing our city, has a chance to get to where they need to go.
Finally, I know that you have announced that you're running for re-election in 2023. I know that, as you said, that odd year, it's good to remember we have elections in those non-even years. But I guess my question to you finally is there, and do you have any interest after that in running for any job in this town?
Well, you know, I love Kansas City. Washington is an interesting place where not as much gets done as we see in the cities. So I'll always think about what might be best for me. But for now, I love being mayor and the dad of an infant.
That's right. Congratulations on your 9-month-old. I remember when your baby was just about to be. So Quentin Lucas, mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, thanks so much for being with us today. It's always great to talk to you. Thank you. That brings us to the end of our program today. A very big thank you to the American Public Transportation Association and Tableau for their support of these conversations. And thanks to all of you attendees for joining us. For those of you who missed any of this, go on our website. You can get the videos, share them with friends, watch them over and over again. All of this will be on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.